Hello, thank you for viewing today's GoToWebinar User Training 101. This is the first part of our two-part training. My name is Nikki, and I'll be your presenter. I'm looking forward to making you feel more at ease using GoToWebinar. We have a lot to review in today's session, but you can always reference this recording in addition to the training materials. I do encourage you to sit back, relax, and really take in today's training. I'm also going to take you on a tour of the GoToWebinar support site where you can access training materials on demand. We do have a great agenda for you today. We're going to start with the basics of the GoToWebinar product, including how to plan and schedule your webinars. Then we'll review both audio options, including best practices. Then we'll talk about starting your events, including starting the webinar in practice mode, pre-broadcast prep, and managing the in-session controls and features. We'll wrap up with a quick review of resources for support. So let's go ahead and get started. How does GoToWebinar work? GoToWebinar is a real-time desktop screen sharing program that allows you to share any document, presentation, or website with your webinar attendees. This makes GoToWebinar extremely simple, efficient, and flexible. You don't need to upload the content you plan on sharing with your attendees. By simply having the presentation content open up on your desktop, you can share it with your audience in real time and on the fly. For example, right now I am sharing PowerPoint, but in just a few moments, I'm going to switch to my web browser, and you're going to be able to see exactly what I'm doing in real time. Besides screen sharing, GoToWebinar also has a robust feature set, including custom registration, branding, email automation, polling, and a post-webinar survey. And we're going to take you through all these features in today's training. There are 3 roles in GoToWebinar that we're going to be referring to throughout today's training. Most likely, each of you will fall in the organizer role, which is why you're with us today in the Webinar 101 training. As an organizer, you do have a GoToWebinar account, which will give you the ability to schedule, start, and manage online webinar events. Now, a key staff member is to have a co-organizer who can assist with planning and hosting the online webinar events. You may have guest speakers or guest presenters in your webinars. These are your panelists. Now, the panelist is there to speak or present, but they're not going to really help you manage the event. And of course, you do have your attendees who are your audience members. I do want to point out, organizers and panelists are considered staff, and we'll elaborate on these roles in more detail during today's training. So now we're going to actually jump into the live demo. I'm simply logged in at GoToWebinar.com. Now I do want to point out the support site. So when you're logged into your account, you can select the circle up here, then go to support, which will take you here. There's a search bar I'll come back to. I do want to point out these tiles at the bottom. Get started is going to give you the basics, how to schedule, customize your events, going over audio. You can click into sub-articles here. This tile here is more in session and post-session features, like how to use the control panel, run reports. We even have something for account admins and billing contacts. And under the resources here, I do want to point out our community. Now, the community is another area to get support, but what I like about the community is you could actually browse and see what other webinar customers are asking, get some ideas on how they're using it. If you subscribe to the community, you then have the option to provide product suggestions and feedback that we do monitor internally. Right here is where you can access our training catalog. We do offer this GoToWebinar 101 and the 102 class live. So you can register for live sessions here. And I do want to point out, we offer a service called Event Services. For a fee, you could actually pay a webinar specialist to help you plan and sit on your live webinar. And we do have a search bar here, so pretty straightforward. When you start to type in a keyword or a question, it does bring up all the related content. If you do want to speak to a live person, simply scroll down to the bottom and notice right here, you'll see the option to call support. And we are available 24/7, so you could always give us a call at any time. All right, so we're now going to jump back to the website here. And before we schedule a webinar, we're going to cover the menu on the left here, starting with our settings. GoToWebinar does include built-in audio. We give you the computer audio option as well as long distance numbers. Anything you select here, it's going to be a default audio option every time you schedule a new webinar. I always recommend offering both the VoIP and phone number, then your attendees can choose. Now, next to the phone option, I can click Edit here, and it's going to show me all the long distance numbers that we offer. Anything that you select here, it will populate every time you schedule a new webinar. And if you do have a handful of countries selected, you're going to want to select the star next to the country where you think you're going to get the most traffic. That number will show at the top of the list, then everything else will be alphabetical order. Some of you might have access to the toll-free option. This is our enhanced audio. So for an additional fee, you do have the ability to offer toll-free phone numbers. Does work the same way. Anything you select here, it will be a default audio option. I'm going to go ahead and save my changes. And even if you set your default, you can still change it and customize it on a per webinar basis. The next tab is the webcam tab. So only staff can share webcams, panelists, organizers, and presenters, up to 25. If you don't want anyone to share webcams, simply turn this off. Then we have recording. Now, I do want to point out, auto record is typically on by default. That means once an organizer starts the broadcast, our system will automatically start recording. Now, if you don't want to record, or perhaps you would like to manually hit a record button at another point in your webinar, you can always turn auto record off and manually record. Then the default save location is to have those recordings save directly in your video library. Then you can decide whether or not you want to include the webcams in the recording. The other save option is you can have the recording save locally to your computer. However, that will not include the webcams. Now, the video library, this is what I was just talking about, the default save location. And they will dive into this a little bit more in the Webinar 102 class. But I do want to point out, next to your recording, you can click the 3 dots. It's going to give you a different or available options. And again, this is covered more extensively in the GoToWebinar 102 class. I also want to just quickly click on this analytics bar here, as this will also be covered further in our 102 class. Specifically, I want to point out right here where it says build reports. These are all the different types of reports that you can run. And notice there is a description next to each report type. And the attendee report is going to give you the most information regarding the attendee, join and leave times, question, poll responses, surveys. But you can definitely run any of the reports that are most important to you. All right, the channel page right here, this will be covered in the 102 class. So we're going to click back on the dashboard, and as we can see, we do have a webinar already scheduled here. To schedule a new webinar, we're going to click the Schedule button here. Now, the majority of your events might be live standard. However, if you have the Pro and Plus plan, you will see the recorded and webcast options, which we do cover in the 102 class. Now, I also want to point out, you can schedule as many webinars as you would like, and we do recommend scheduling a test webinar right away so you get familiar with the scheduling process. So I'm going to call this test webinar live. We're going to have it occur once, but you can have recurring webinars. You could even include a custom schedule. Simply select on the calendar and choose the date and the time for your webinar. Be sure to keep it in your own time zone. And today we're going over standard, and I'm going to click schedule. It's now taking me to the event details page where I can customize this webinar. Now, if you do need to make any edits, you simply start typing right in the text box or clicking into it. Here, you can include a description. Maybe you want to pop an agenda in here. And the next thing is to invite your staff members, organizers, and panelists. To invite your co-organizers, you're going to simply click on the box here. Now, you are the main organizer, but you can always have a co-organizer help you, and they do not have to have a webinar license. Simply click on the plus sign here. Then just type their name and email. Once you hit update, they will then get their invitation as a co-organizer with their specific join information. Now, you're going to invite the panelists the same way, but you're going to do it from the panelist section here. And then remember, the panelist does have different features than your organizer, co-organizer. Next are the settings. These are actually carrying over from the default settings that we looked at earlier, but as I mentioned, you can make changes on a per webinar basis. So perhaps you have auto record on by default, but this specific webinar, you do not want it to auto record. You can always turn it off. Or maybe you want to offer some additional audio options. So we didn't have toll-free as a default, but maybe this specific webinar, I do want to include toll-free phone numbers, then I can make those changes on the fly. And I do also like to point out, depending on your role, the organizer and the panelist will always join unmuted while your attendee is in a hard muted state. Also, depending on the role, the access codes are unique. So that's another reason you do not want to share join information. You can include a welcome message and as well as list your presenters in the waiting room. The waiting room is when you start your webinar but not actively show your screen. Next is branding and colors. This is where you can customize the look and feel. These are going to carry over to the waiting room, registration, and any automated emails. So you could add a logo. You could include a feature image. We do have some feature colors here you can choose from, but if you want to get more customized with it, you can click the plus option here, and you can select the background. You have the option to choose the title button. If you want, you could even pop hex code in here if you're trying to match company colors exactly, and then you also can do a border. If I preview this page, this is what it's going to look like. And that logo, it's going to show up here at the top, and the feature image, it's going to show to the right of the description. All right, now you are also going to be responsible for sharing the registration URL to your attendees for them to join. I will circle back on how you can share that registration because we're not done scheduling just yet. Next is registration. There are a handful of settings here. I'm not going to cover everything, but notice if you hover over the eye with a circle around it, it will give you information on that feature. I do specifically want to point out registration questions. Bare minimum, your attendees have to provide name and email. That's required. If you click default right here, you could include additional fields. Maybe you want to know their job title or organization. Now, if you mark it with a star here, it will be required, just like name and email. They can't leave it blank. Down here, you can include custom questions, short answer, or multiple choice. And in real time, it will track those registrants who are trying to join or who register. You can track it in real time. Next, we have emails. Our system is going to send out automated emails, and the reply to is going to be linked to the license holder. You do have the ability to change that reply to email just by simply typing into the text box. Perhaps you want this to go to an alias or your colleague. And you can set the frequency depending on how far out scheduled your webinar is. You can send up to 3 reminder emails, hours, days, and weeks. The reason we don't see weeks is because I didn't schedule this further out in the future. And the reminder email, it does have pre-populated information on how they join, but you can always add some custom text right here. And the follow-up email, you can have this go out sooner or later as well. By default, it's going to go out 1 day after the scheduled end time. And for this one, you can be copied on it. You could put your own text here. You could also include a certificate, which looks like this. And then if you recorded the webinar and the recording is in your video library, you can have the recording go out in the follow-up email as well. All right, engage your attendees. So we're going to start with the survey here. You can have a survey go out, and these are your options on a scale of 1 to 5, short answer, or multiple choice. Just go ahead and create one really quick so you can see what that looks like. And this is just a short answer so they can open up and reply to that. And you could do a variation of each type of question on the same survey, and then you want to determine when it goes out, after the webinar in a separate tab, or it's going to go out in the follow-up email. Next are polls. Polls are a great way to keep your audience engaged, as well as find out additional information about them. And it's always multiple choice, and then you set the answers. And you're going to launch the polls in the live session, but you can set them up in advance like we're doing here. Handouts are a great way to push information out to your attendees in session. You can distribute up to 5, and these are the supported file types. Anything that you upload here will sit on the attendee control panel, and they'll have the ability to download and save while they're in session. Next, videos. You can share up to 20 videos in your live webinar. You are going to have to upload it here in advance. It does have to be a YouTube or an MP4 video. Now, I'll show you how to launch the video when we jump back to the PowerPoint, but just know you should upload, or you have to upload those here in advance in order for them to launch in session. And it's available for the Pro and Plus webinar plans. All right, let me just go ahead and click back on the dashboard. The webinar that we scheduled is right here. Now, I could always click on the title. It's going to take me right back to the event details section where I can make any edits or customizations. Now, don't forget, you do have to invite your attendees via that registration URL. If I click the share button here, notice you can copy it, paste it into your invite of choice. Maybe you want to put it in a calendar. You also have the option to push it to these social media sites if you're trying to reach a large audience. Clicking back on the dashboard again, when you're ready to start the webinar, notice the 3 dots, and we do recommend starting your webinar in practice mode. Now, to recap our webinar planning best practices, select the optimal time and date. For example, most marketers find webinars held on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday have the highest attendance rate. Also consider folks across other time zones. Once you've invited your staff, ensure they've received their invites. Schedule a dry run with staff a few days prior to ensure everyone is comfortable with their roles and understands the webinar's flow. Consider a co-organizer for background support. Ensure you understand how both audio options work. Audio is a very important piece to a successful webinar. As the main organizer, it's a good idea to understand how both audio options work in case your staff have any questions. Let's start with the phone call option. When you select phone call in your control panel, the dial-in information will be displayed. Simply dial the phone number, the access code, and your unique PIN number. Now, the access code is different depending on the role. Remember, we went over that. Organizer, panelist, and attendee all have different access codes. The audio PIN is unique to each phone caller. PIN stands for personal identification number. Entering the PIN is highly recommended as it will enable the muting controls and active speaker identification. And if you're ever having trouble connecting with the phone number, notice right here where it says problem dialing in, this is where you can get a backup number. With computer audio, the quality is highly dependent on your local internet connection and the hardware that you're using for the mic and speakers. For best quality, we do recommend a high-speed wired connection. You're going to want to close out any programs or applications that you're not going to be using during the webinar to help free up bandwidth. For hardware, we do recommend a headset for best quality. You typically want to stay away from the external mic and speakers or those built into a laptop, as they may cause feedback or echo. So a quick recap of our audio best practices. To avoid unnecessary background noise, ask staff to mute themselves when they are not actively presenting or speaking. If staff dial in, ask them to enter their audio PIN to enable the active speaker feature and muting controls. And to optimize audio, you want to ensure that staff member selects phone call in their control panel when dialing into the audio. This avoids having two different audio inputs from the same person. So say that you dialed the phone number, but then you left mic and speaker selected on the control panel, you're going to be connected twice and cause a feedback loop and audio echo. Use a fully charged or wired headset for computer audio. Avoid speaker and mobile phones if possible. This will also help avoid echo and improve audio clarity. Our best practice is to start the live webinar in practice mode 40 minutes before your scheduled start time. Instruct your staff to join 30 minutes early to run through last-minute checks. As an organizer, you can start your webinar in practice mode before starting the pre-broadcast and live session. This allows you to run through any last-minute screen sharing with the staff before attendees join. Attendees who try to join while you're in practice mode, they will see a notification that the webinar has not yet started. They're going to be asked to join at the scheduled start time. With this in mind, it is important to limit your time in practice mode so early attendees can join your waiting room and be placed on hold for the pre-broadcast. Let's go over the production checklist. The webinar scheduling organizer launches the webinar in practice mode. You're going to want to run audio and webcam checks and confirm everybody knows their role. Review roles, upgrade the panelist to co-organizer if needed. Reconfirm the flow of the presentation. Who's going to be screen sharing, managing the questions? Has anything changed since the dry run? Turn off any devices that make noise and close any programs not in use. Set the staff chat to organizers and panelists. Practice using the chat with each other. The chat will be helpful for staff members to communicate while the webinar is in session. To start your event in practice mode, simply log into the website, GoToWebinar.com, click those three dots, then click that practice button like we showed you earlier. Once you start your webinar in practice mode, the control panel will launch onto your desktop. Your staff join the subconference with you. Avoid clicking Start for now. The benefit of starting in practice mode is to run final checks with the staff, talk about any last-minute screen sharing before the attendees arrive, and ensure the broadcast isn't started too early. Since you're starting the webinar in practice mode early, you'll have plenty of time to adjust a few of your own options before staff arrive. From the File drop-down, you can edit your name, how it's displayed in session. This name shows up both in the staff list and in the Who's Talking indicator when you speak. You can adjust your attendee options. If you don't want the attendees to see who else is in the webinar, you can keep the attendee list hidden. You can also choose whether or not the attendees can ask questions or raise hands. The View drop-down here allows you to choose what tabs and features are visible in your control panel. So for example, if you're not going to launch polls or provide handouts, simply uncheck them from your view so they're not taking up space. Now, if you accidentally close one out and you need to get it back, simply go to View and check the option. You should also review the in-session audio options before your attendees arrive using the menu button here in the audio pane. So you do have the option to change the webinar's available audio options by selecting Edit Audio Mode. You can also disable the on-hold beeps. These are going to beep every couple seconds until a second person joins the audio with you. And the entry and exit chimes you're going to hear anytime someone joins or disconnects from the audio. Now, for the entry and exit chimes, you may want to disable those or turn them to off if you have a large webinar where people are coming and going, because everyone can hear those chimes. If you're the main organizer, it's important that you know how to manage your staff as they arrive to your webinar and throughout the event. As staff join at the 30-minute mark, manage their settings and audio. Under the Staff tab, you can see Dwight, the webinar's organizer, and Angela, our panelist. The mic icon indicates Dwight has joined audio via the computer audio or VoIP. The telephone icon indicates Angela dialed in by phone. If the icon is gray, that means she has not yet entered in her PIN number. Make sure your staff have entered their PIN number, as it will allow you to mute and unmute them if necessary. So when I right-click on Angela's name, I do have the option to send the audio PIN. It's going to flash on her screen. Or I could say, hey, Angela, will you please press #72# on your phone keypad? Once she's done that, notice her icon is lit up green, which means she's fully connected to audio. Angela can now self-mute by clicking her icon. This is indicated by a gray slash. As the organizer, you can hard mute someone by clicking on their audio icon. This is going to put an orange slash through the icon. This little icon here, the little screen, it's going to display next to the person who's actively sharing their screen, so the presenter. By default, this will be the webinar's organizer, but you can pass that to anyone else in your event. If a staff member opts to turn their webcam on, that's going to be indicated by this camera icon lighting up to green. Now, again, when you right-click on someone's name, you do have additional options. So notice I can now mute or unmute them, prompt them to turn webcam on, make presenter, promote to co-organizer, give keyboard and mouse control. I could even dismiss them. So if you're ever wondering what you can do to an attendee or a staff member, right-click their name. It's going to give you all the options. Then we do have the mute all and unmute all buttons that can be used to mute or unmute all participants in the webinar. Now, attendees are muted by default, hard muted, and when you select the unmute all button, the attendees are now soft muted, and they can control their own audio and unmute themselves as needed. You can take the opportunity to test your webcam. Let me just pop mine on real quick. You can share up to 25 webcams at a time. And remember, only staff can share webcams, so an attendee can't randomly pop theirs on. And to share the webcam, you're going to simply click this button here. And as the organizer, you can actually send someone a webcam request, but you're not able to force turn it on. You can, however, turn off someone's webcam by clicking the webcam icon near their name or right-clicking their name like I just showed you. Practice sending a few chat messages to each other. The chat feature is intended for you and your staff to send private messages to one another. Now, only organizers can use it to send a one-way message to the entire audience. As an organizer, you should set the chat drop-down to organizers panelists only to avoid chatting to the entire audience by mistake. Now, the panelist chat will be set to organizers and panelists only by default, and they can chat with other staff privately from the drop-down. Attendees cannot use or see the chat feature. Instead, attendees will have a questions tab on their control panel. Any questions they submit there will go directly to the organizers, which we'll look at in a moment. While the staff join in practice mode, this is a great time to quickly go over screen sharing one more time with the designated presenter. The benefit of keeping the webinar in practice mode is the ability to screen share and or run through your deck without attendees being able to see what you are doing. Before you start your broadcast or screen sharing, you'll notice an indicator at the top of your screen sharing panel with your screen sharing status. Screen sharing is never going to start automatically. To begin screen sharing, either click the big play button here, or if you select the drop down here, you'll have additional options. Notice you can choose which monitor to share if you've got multiple. And below just a window, you do have the option to bring up just a specific application versus your entire screen. The clean screen option here, it will give it a more professional feel. So you can hide the icons, the taskbar at the bottom, and any background pictures. Once you've started screen sharing, you'll notice the prompt at the top of the screen sharing tab has updated to let you know you're on air showing screen. That big play button will now show as a pause button. When you're actively presenting and sharing your screen, you can pause your screen share at any time. This allows you to freeze your presentation and what attendees see. For example, once you've gone over final checks and screen sharing, before you take it out of practice mode, have the presenter pause their screen while attendees join and you wait to begin the broadcast. When you're ready to go live, be sure to unpause your screen. The audience view here will display a thumbnail view of what attendees are currently seeing. This is going to help you confirm that the attendees are actually seeing what you want them to see. Whoever is presenting can give other webinar staff members keyboard and mouse control by selecting the button here. An example is when you might want to have the co-organizer host the PowerPoint on their screen, but then the panelists will click through the PowerPoint when it's their turn. Whoever is sharing control, they do need to essentially not touch their mouse or they will take control back. We highly suggest practicing this during the dry run to ensure success. Or you can also change presenter by using the button here. Simply select Change Presenter and choose who you want to have show their screen. And remember, you could also right-click on their name to make these actions like I showed you earlier. It's whatever is best for you, either the buttons or right-clicking. Now, anyone who is the presenter, meaning the one invited to share their screen, can also use the drawing tools by clicking the highlighter icon on their Grab tab. Can easily switch between the normal to the non-drawing mode, to the pen, highlighter, spotlight, or arrow. So let me give you an example. I went ahead and engaged my spotlight. So notice I can point things out. Then to quickly get back to my mouse, I'll hit escape and I'm back to my normal mouse. For the highlighter, notice if you hold the shift key down, you can draw really straight lines. Then I hit escape, it takes me back to my normal mouse, and then you can click erase all drawings so they don't go on to the next screen. Okay, now you're ready to let your attendees into the pre-broadcast. We recommend taking the webinar out of practice mode in the pre-broadcast at least 10 minutes before the scheduled start time to allow the attendees to join early. The pre-broadcast is like opening the door to your virtual auditorium to allow the attendees to find their seats. You and your staff remain behind the curtain where attendees cannot hear or see webcams till you start the broadcast. Once you're ready for the attendees to join the pre-broadcast, click the Start button at the top of the panel. You'll see a pop-up notification asking if you want to start the webinar. After clicking the Start button in the pop-up, you'll now see a new Start Broadcast button appear at the top of your controls. You're now in the pre-broadcast mode. Audio is limited to you and your staff. While attendees can join the webinar at this point, they're placed on hold. Screen sharing will be visible to the audience, but they will not be able to see active webcams or hear you. Once the webinar has been taken out of practice mode, you're going to see that attendees are joining. They're on hold and they cannot hear you until you click the orange Start Broadcast button. Similar to your staff, you will see how attendees have connected into the audio with the corresponding audio icons. Attendees are hard muted by default and typically use the Q&A box to ask text questions, but you can unmute them if you want. The phone icon indicates that the attendee has dialed in. If the attendee phone icon is gray, they must enter their audio PIN to be unmuted. The mic icon indicates they have selected computer audio, and this crossed out icon indicates they've opted to have no audio. If an attendee raises their hand, you're going to see a little hand icon next to their name, and the question mark indicates they've asked a text question. Let's officially start your webinar in the live broadcast. In the live demo, we showed you that most accounts are set to automatically record when the broadcast begins. You can confirm by making sure this box is checked. Or you can uncheck the box and then you can manually start the recording by clicking the Start Recording box here button. At the webinar scheduled start time, confirm all key players are ready to go live. When you and your staff are 100% ready, click the Start Broadcast to go live on audio and webcam. You and your audience will hear an automated voice letting you know everyone, the broadcast has now started and attendees are in listen-only mode. Next, let's look at how to keep your audience engaged during your event. It's important to provide ways for your audience to participate during a webinar. We've included certain features with this in mind. Consider having a moderator with co-organizer privileges. Your moderator can help with the housekeeping and the intro for your event. They can launch polls or present content. Have a few polls set up to use during the event, similar to how we leverage the polling feature in our live training to learn more about you and your use of the webinar product. Encourage Q&A. Perhaps the co-organizer will answer the attendee questions while you present or run live Q&A. And remember, you can play up to 20 videos, either MP4 or YouTube, in your session. Finally, you can also use the hand-raising feature. You can use this feature to identify attendees who want to ask a verbal question and be unmuted, or to do a casual poll with your audience. All of these features will keep the audience engaged with your event. So now let's show you how to actually launch the polls. The poll questions will be available on the poll drop-down here. We've got 3 polls here. Select the poll that you would like to launch. Then when you're ready, click the launch button. The attendees are now voting on the poll. The organizer can see the polls in progress. This timer here is showing you how long the poll's been open and the percentage of people that have voted. When you're satisfied, click the close button here. It's going to go right back to screen sharing. And if you do want to share the results with your attendees, simply click the share button and the results will display to your audience. Then that same button is a hide button when you're ready to hide the results, and it will then go back to screen sharing again. During the live demo, we talked about sharing videos. To play the video that you pre-uploaded, simply click the screen drop down here. Notice under uploaded videos, it's going to show you all the videos you've included. Click the video that you want to play. This player is going to pop open. Once you hit the play button, that video will play for your audience. When the video is over, be sure to either select the option to screen share or stop showing video. Now, keep in mind, the video sound will play out of everyone's default computer speakers. So for those attendees who are on the telephone, they're going to make sure their computer speakers are turned up so they can hear the video play. So you are going to see questions that attendees submit throughout your webinar in the questions pane of your control panel. For any section of the panel, you can click this icon, the box with the arrow, to pop it out. Super helpful for questions. Once the box pops out, you can then click the bottom corner here to make the box bigger or smaller. When you click on a question, here is where you can chat back the response. You can send it privately, or you can send it to everyone. The check mark here indicates the questions that you've text responded to. Now, if you right-click the question, notice you do have additional options. You can flag certain questions that you want to read aloud out at the end of the webinar during the Q&A, or you could use the flagging however you would like. You also have the option to assign the question to a staff member. Remember, the panelists will not see this question section, but you can assign them individual questions that they will then be able to see and respond to. When it comes time to wrap up your webinar, consider some of our best practices. Let your attendees know if you'll be sharing a recording of the webinar. This is done by linking the recording to the webinar's follow-up email. Consider posting the recording online for on-demand viewing. You can use the built-in webinar survey to gather attendee feedback and ideas for future events. Provide your contact information and let the attendees know how you'll follow up if they do have additional questions. The final slide's a great opportunity to promote future events. Finally, after the webinar ends, remember to pull the post-webinar reports. You've gathered a lot of great information from the attendee registration to their participation, so use the reports and follow up as needed. After today's training, I do encourage you to view our key resource materials. The link to the materials can be accessed via today's follow-up email. Among the resources included is a dry run guide that's going to take you through the key steps of a technical practice session and a presenter checklist to help you prep for that first webinar. And another note, as mentioned, our webinar training is a two-part series. I do encourage you to sign up for the GoToWebinar User 102 training. A link to register, it will be in the follow-up email, and you can also find it on the customer support site like I demoed earlier. The GoToWebinar User 102 training provides key tips on running a successful webinar, working with co-organizers, goes over a dry run, reviews advanced features including editing, transcripts, and GoToStage. Super helpful. One great benefit to attending the 102 class, any attendees of the 102 class have the opportunity to schedule a 30-minute one-on-one meeting with the webinar specialist. This complimentary meeting is designed to help you with the advanced questions or to have an informational pre-broadcast practice run to learn best practices. So if at the end of our two-part webinar training series you do need additional help, definitely take advantage of that opportunity. So I do want to say thank you everyone for viewing today's recording. Definitely check out the 102 training, and I do want to say thank you and have a great rest of your day. And good luck with GoToWebinar.